When I was student and when I was thinking what to do, what will be interesting and actual at that time, it was 70s, beginning of 70s in Soviet Union, and of course the contemporary art was forbidden, and Christian art was forbidden, and modernism art also was forbidden. And so I was thinking what to do, and then I understand that these old photos, family photos, they were also banned, and nobody can show it. People were afraid to show their family photos, like in China in 60s, but in our country it's happened in 30s and 20s. And so I feel that when I paint from these old photos, because I cannot show the photos too, I feel that I'm doing something good. Art for me is always to defend somebody, to maybe to speak or think about a hero who died or epoch which is finished. And so this Georgian nobility, and of course I mean spiritual aristocracy. I wanted to say that the first picture I did, it was poor Georgian farmers standing in the under somewhere, and then I understand that the government don't like to show that something, that Georgia had a nobility, that there was some aristocratic spirit in dancing, in polyphonic songs of Georgia, in very beautiful Christian art and frescoes and icons. And I understand that everything what is forbidden is art in this country. So I made such a series of pictures from old family photos. The people who were there, they were mostly killed and arrested in 20s, in 30s, and so the photo was also, it was connected with avant-garde, it was document, and government, they don't like photography too. So I did this series and I call it Destroyed Aristocracy. Because at that time in Soviet Union, it was, even title was very against the dictatorship. So when I can show them only in 1985 in Gorbachev time. Before it was dangerous and impossible. And but at that time when I showed them, it was a little bit like a shock, because nobody did such art before. On this wall are the part of these pictures. They are very old. They are done in 70s, and maybe because it is a little bit interesting as art was against the dictatorship. You know, 2 or 3 exhibitions I made in the flat of my friends. Not official exhibitions. It was a little bit dangerous, but not so much like in Stalin time, of course. Anyway, it was a little bit dangerous, but in 85, we didn't know that so-called perestroika begins. But we feel that something is changing, and I made such half-official exhibition in Tbilisi, my town, and after this it became popular. I mean, this pictures done from film photos became popular in Russia too, because it was also about Russian empires, too, not only Georgian, old Georgian kingdom. And so then only in 1990 I can go away from Soviet Union. I was in Paris and in France. And then in 93, when it was time of terror and war in Georgia, and there was no electricity and nothing for 10 years, Swiss people invite me in Basel. And I was half year in Basel, and then we made, together with Christoph Merian Stiftung, organized the exchange program, and many Swiss artists, photographers were living in my little studio in Tiflis, and many Georgian young artists came here in Switzerland. So it was my connection with Switzerland, and it was first country when foreign country after this totalitarian regime I entered, and I feel here in Switzerland like I am at home. I love this country because of this very much, and they really helped me and other Georgian artists. So this exhibition for me is also very important because it is in Switzerland, it's in Kunsthalle, and together with director and curator of exhibition Daniel Baumann, we organize shows and exhibitions of Georgian avant-garde, which was also closed, and nobody knows about it for 50, 70 years. And 3 exhibitions in New York, in Zurich, and in Brussels shows that it's very interesting. International artists were in Tbilisi at that time, beginning of 10th and 20th of 20th century. And so I am very thankful that Daniel Baumann organized these exhibitions about Georgian art, I mean modernism. You know, when I was first time in '93 in Switzerland, one newspaper asked me now everything is all right in former Soviet Union, and I answered that no, it's everybody was speaking that now everything is finished and so on, but I remember I told them that no, nothing is finished, and everything will happen, many terrible things again. And so it happened, and till today we are in big problem because we are a little old Christian kingdom surrounded with Muslim countries, and then Mongolia and the Russian Empire, and then Soviet Union, and so it is always very difficult for us, and it depends what will happen in big politics and with big countries. And so today I think these pictures are actual again because nothing changed. The so-called censura in Soviet Union also bans many things today. My pictures or my works too, till today, and I cannot show everything till today. Well, everything was banned before Picasso, to say so somehow. And sometimes I get some magazines from West Europe or United States because my father was a very well-known mathematician. He was member of New York Mathematician Society, and so sometimes he gets some magazines from his friends, mathematicians. They know that they could have nothing to read from new books and new magazines, and so I saw what's happening in contemporary art, but when I was child and in my school. But then I like very much Georgian old Christian art. We have very beautiful art in caves, like in Anatolia, because Georgia is somehow the same area, and in these caves, monks of 6th century and 7th, beginning from 7th century, they paint very beautiful frescoes, Christian frescoes, and I found that they are a little bit like contemporary art, because no naturalism, no reality, only mystical, and the formation is the same. Even some cubism was there. It was funny, of course, but very interesting. But I mean very early Christian art, because after 10th, 11th centuries it became very canonic, very high quality. But anyway, before it was very interesting, like maybe a little bit like first Irish manuscripts or some other things like it. I used and so I decided to somehow to be in this tradition of old art, and also to do something new. And this deformation of these figures is coming from this old Christian art. Little bit I made these deformations like it was in our old frescoes. Of course, it's also influence from contemporary art too. There was such very famous Georgian avant-gardist, Ilyas Danevich, one of the father of Georgian, and not only Georgian, world avant-garde. He then became very famous in France too. He was there, and he and his brother, they had such a concept that they call it everythingness. In Russian, всёчество, everythingness, everythingism. So they said that today artists can work using everything, the history, old works, new, everything. And somehow it was, they were speaking about contemporary today's art, but they speak it in 1914. And I know that also, and I know this, and I also want to combine everything, like from this Danevich everythingness. So my style is very like there is everything, old and new and not so old and so on. You know, in 60s, my older brother, he was student at the time, and he sometimes makes some films. Also, he made some performance in Moscow and in, but of course, at the time, nobody can say that it is art. She was just doing as a not official art. So from my childhood, I somehow understand that I can do something like this. But till 90s, there was no camera, no video camera. Nobody, these poor Georgian artists, they made some performances and actions, but without camera. Of course, in 70s, there is one film which I did in 70s, but it is not video camera, and it is just we made it from the old Soviet camera. But anyway, as a video art, the first camera I bought in Basel in black market, and then I made some video films also when I made some performance, and mostly this performance was also forbidden at the time. I made video from these performances. Here are 3 video works. One is very old, from 1972. Another is called Georgia Millennium. Millennium in Georgia. It was such performance, little bit strange and against politics of that time. Georgia was terror and terrible situation, but people, ambassadors and people from foreigners and United States, they say it's big democracy there, and I wanted to put some food and wine on coffins and invite ambassadors like they were in their some parties. They did the same, but I wanted to put on coffins some à la fourchette, as they said, and to invite ambassadors, but they told me I will be killed until I enter the National Art Gallery. So I wait till Millennium Day exactly, and then I made some spontaneous such performance. I went in one old where are the graves of many old artists place, and asked this administration and the people who worked there that I invited ambassadors and we must put on coffins, on your coffins, this wine and some sweets, and I did this performance. It's here. It was also I couldn't show this info only in foreign countries. I show it after several years, and there is also one film about it's high mountain village where Christian and Muslim people are together, very friendly. It is border when it was Caucasian War in 90s, and so it was such a place where people were living in danger, and so we did with my friends this something like carpet, but from sheep, and it's called teka in this. And it is very old tradition coming from Hittite and Sumerian times, and this mountain woman still keeps this tradition with singing and dancing and making this teka and color it with natural. For example, the one which is here is done only from wine, red wine, or black wine, how Georgians call it. And so this is one film also here with this woman. Maybe it was the last time of this tradition when they did this artwork, their artwork. Then I can speak also about this picture, which is called 1924. In 1924, Stalin already occupied Georgia, and it was big terror already, but in 1924, Georgian social democratic government, which at the time were immigrants in France, they organized a little revolution, wanted to organize against Bolsheviks, and but then it became big terror against it, and the Secret Service of Soviet Union killed many people, very many people, in every town, every village. After this, Georgia changed as a country. You know, before it was another, and after it became what it is today. And also, it's interesting date because, for example, American historians today spoke and wrote books about that the last divorce between socialists and communists happened because of this Georgian 1924 year, when it was terrible terror in Georgia against socialists too. And so it was the date when at last the communists and socialists divorced. When I was child, my grandmother and my grandfather was as a medicine doctor in one region, when they killed people in the train. Women, men, children, everybody, they put in the train and shot them from guns outside, and blood was coming from. It's a famous story. My grandfather was there, and grandmother, when I was child, told me that dogs were coming with the fingers of people, and by the rings on this finger, family recognized their family members. And I used my childhood paintings in end of 70s, beginning of 80s, and made this picture as like a program of these terrible years and time when aristocracy in Georgia was killed bad. Not only aristocracy, of course, they killed workers and farmers and teachers and everybody. Here, this W is written here. No, as I told you before, in 90s, 10 years, in Georgia there was a war, no electricity for 10 years, no warm, no salary, nothing. And my parents at the time, elder brother, they were scientists, and my mother was professor of Sanskrit, and she had very interesting book about Indo-Germanic language, and she proved that very old words of Indo-Germanic language are in very old Georgian writings, and it shows that it was very important for Indo-Germanic scientists, because they understand that because the Indo-Germanic language was earlier in such places like Mesopotamia and Hittite Empire and so on. And so my mother was very old at the time, and father, who was mathematician, he also wrote some dictionaries about mathematics, for example, 6-language dictionary of mathematicians. And my brother too, he's scientist, and because there was no paper, no salary, no money, nothing, no food, they wrote their scientists and very important scientist works on toilet papers. it's real story, and on tea, very cheap tea papers. And so once I use these papers, toilet and tea papers, as my work. To show that it's real story. It's interesting because it's coming from real story, it's not fantasy. And there was a big exhibition in Tbilisi of Georgian and Swiss young artists, and Daniel Baumann and Armleder were there, and Uglansky, one Swiss-Polish artist, and he made some work about Warsaw, his town, and because of this, beside I made this W as a Warsaw and war, the word, and also there is new etymology of Warsaw too. So this work, and Daniel asked me to do it again here. This work is, the first professional artist in Georgia in 19th century was a painter named Gabashvili. He was uncle of my mother, and he studied in München Academy. And in Soviet Union, everybody knows him as a realistic, naturalistic, academic artist, so-called. And only 10 years ago, we found that in archive, in museum, that he was symbolist. He was in Munich in 1990 and 1986 about, and he made very interesting symbolic works at that time, and many photos, and it was very interesting that he painted many androgynes, so-called at the time. It was such a fashion, and many philosophers at that time spoke about androgynes, and artists, German artists mostly. And he had such kind of works, and when I paint this picture, it's man and woman together, because I begin to paint from woman, and then it's also somehow connected with Polish art. Well, it's not interesting why, but then I called this Prince Androgyn and dedicated to Gabashvili, this first Georgian professional artist, because for us it was new that he was, after this modernism in Georgia turned from 1901 to 1990, not 1890. Then this, for example, is abstract painting. I paint this. There is some, this is like an object. There is some tobacco pressed on this picture, and at that time I wanted, it was end of 80s, and I understand that these demonstrations and perestroika will finish with big blood. And I wanted to show that it will be finished with this, and I made a series of works. Not everything is exposed here, but it's one of such pictures from here. Very abstract, but indeed it's a little bit connected with Russian poet Marina Tsvetaeva, who spoke about the same things in 1920. when I was listening the American and European radio secretly in Soviet Union, they spoke much about soc art in beginning of 80s. Well, with irony to do something about communist dictatorship situation. And at the time I understand that I call this work at first Venus and Mars. I want to show that Mars was communist leaders, always very old, always very ill, but cruel, and they liked little girls for many reasons. And there was also no erotics. And only erotic was in French communist magazine, because they cannot forbid it. You know, it's French artists, communists, they were, even Picasso was communist before Hungary, and before war in Hungary, I mean. And they, so erotic was from French communist magazine and from one magazine from DDR, East Germany. And so I use this soft erotica, the only erotica which was in Soviet Union, from these magazines and these cruel old leaders. And I made series of the works. Then in 90s I changed the name and call it Venus and Mars, but it's the same. Well, I want to say about my exhibition that at first I am very thankful for Daniel Baumann, the curator, and my friends and many curators and people, art people in Switzerland. I am very thankful for this country, as I told before, and I want to say that because of the reason, what maybe it's interesting, my exhibition is that it shows how art was forbidden in that time when, and how artists were fighting against this. Maybe because of this is interesting. It shows a way how we were fighting against such forbidden art things.